Suez Canal sees 10% of the world's trade go through it.
Business News, Stephen Carroll's joining us here on set. Now, he's starting off with this incredible story. A ship has actually blocked one of the world's most important shipping lanes. This is the Suez.
12% of everything you buy passes through a ditch barely wider than a football field. Every single day, oil, grain, electronics, and medicine are funneled through 100 miles of man-made waterway in the Egyptian desert, connecting Asia to Europe. The Suez Canal is not just a shortcut, it is the plumbing of global trade, a narrow pipe carrying the economic lifeblood of entire continents. And for Egypt, it is something even more personal, a lifeline that pumps billions of dollars in hard foreign currency into the national budget every single year. That money stabilizes government finances, pays public sector workers, funds social programs, and keeps the lights on in one of the most populous nations in the Middle East. But that lifeline is now under siege. Not from an earthquake, not from an engineering failure, from something far harder to contain: insecurity. Piracy, regional armed conflict, geopolitical tension that has turned the Red Sea, the narrow gateway to the Suez, into one of the most dangerous stretches of water on Earth. Since late 2023, escalating attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait have forced the global shipping industry into an impossible choice. And the consequences of that choice are not staying at sea. They are rippling inland, landing on the dinner tables of ordinary Egyptian families, and threatening to redraw the map of global commerce. This is the story of how a crisis at sea became a crisis on land, and why, if it does not stop, it could permanently reshape the way the world moves its goods. To understand what Egypt stands to lose, you have to understand what the Suez Canal actually is, not just as a waterway, but as an economic engine. Think of it like a national toll road, except instead of cars, it charges the largest vessels on the planet. Every tanker, every container ship, every bulk carrier pays Egypt a transit fee. Added together, those fees have historically generated billions in annual revenue, paid in hard foreign currency that the Egyptian pound desperately needs. That revenue supports one of the largest public sectors in the region and funds imports of essential goods. In a country where the state is one of the biggest employers, Suez Canal income is not a bonus. It is a structural pillar holding up the entire fiscal architecture. And that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. When you depend on a single corridor for that much national income, that corridor stops being just infrastructure. It becomes a pressure point, a single place where disruption does not just slow trade, it chokes an entire economy. So what happens when that pressure point is squeezed? Shipping companies face a brutal calculation. Pay surging insurance premiums to transit the Suez under threat, premiums that have doubled and in some cases tripled since the crisis intensified, or take the long way around. The long way means the Cape of Good Hope, the southern tip of Africa. Rerouting via the Cape adds up to 2 additional weeks to a single voyage, 2 extra weeks of fuel, crew wages, and maintenance. Each detour can cost millions of dollars more than the Suez route. But here is the painful irony. Even companies that avoid the Red Sea entirely still pay for its instability. The surge in insurance premiums affects everyone, and every added dollar, every fuel charge, every inflated premium, every delayed delivery gets passed down the chain, from the shipping company to the importer to the retailer, and finally to the person at a grocery store in Cairo, wondering why the price of bread went up again. This is where the crisis stops being abstract and becomes deeply personal. Egypt is one of the world's largest importers of wheat. A significant share of its food supply arrives by sea. When shipping costs spike, the price of those imports climbs. And in an emerging economy where millions of families already spend a large share of their income on food, even a moderate increase can be devastating. Think of it like a universal shopping basket. The same bread, rice, and cooking oil all cost more, not because the ingredients changed, but because the road they traveled became longer, more dangerous, and more expensive. Researchers have documented a moderate to strong link between maritime disruptions and food price inflation in emerging markets. And Egypt sits at the dead center of that vulnerability, hit from both sides simultaneously. Global import costs are rising. National revenue from the canal is falling. During major disruptions, over $5 billion in annual Suez Canal revenue is considered at risk. That is the kind of shortfall that forces a government to either borrow more heavily or slash public spending. And both options accelerate the very inflation already squeezing households. For Egyptian families, it simply feels like the ground shifting beneath their feet. Beyond the budget numbers, there is a human cost that rarely makes the headlines. When canal traffic drops, so do the jobs that depend on it. Port workers, logistics operators, maintenance crews, the small businesses in canal-adjacent cities like Ismailia and Port Said that survive on the steady rhythm of international vessels passing through. These are livelihoods built around the daily movement of global trade, and they disappear quietly when that trade reroutes. The damage extends further. Because canal revenues help fund public sector employment, a sustained decline threatens the government's ability to maintain its workforce and continue social programs that millions of Egyptians rely on. The connection between a shipping attack in the Red Sea and a delayed government paycheck in Upper Egypt may seem distant, but the economic thread between them is direct and measurable. There is another layer. Egypt has invested in ambitious blue economy infrastructure projects, large-scale coastal developments designed to modernize the maritime sector. But scholars warn that if not managed inclusively, these projects risk sidelining local fishing economies and traditional coastal livelihoods. Researchers call it the blue justice gap, one of the most under-examined risks in Egypt's economic future. All of this leads to a question that keeps economists awake at night. What if this is not temporary? Most economic models agree the Cape route is significantly less efficient than the Suez Canal. The 2-week time penalty, the millions in extra fuel costs, the higher carbon emissions, all of it argues against permanence. But scholars increasingly warn that if Red Sea insecurity persists for several consecutive years, shipping patterns could harden. What began as a crisis detour could calcify into a permanent fixture of global trade. Consider what that would mean. African ports, which currently handle only about 7% of global seaborne trade, would need massive development. Supply chains would reorganize around the longer route, locking in higher costs indefinitely. Food price inflation would not spike and retreat, it would settle at a permanently higher baseline. And the environmental cost would be staggering, running directly against global decarbonization efforts. Meanwhile, Egypt would be left watching the world's commerce sail around its continent instead of through its canal, with no proven policy framework to reverse the shift. Regional cooperation, technological solutions, new infrastructure investment. Scholars identify all of these as potential tools, but not one has been tested at the scale required. The Suez Canal is one of the greatest engineering achievements in human history, a passage carved through sand and stone that quietly holds together the architecture of modern commerce. But no canal, no matter how vital, can protect itself. What happens in the Red Sea does not stay in the Red Sea. It lands on government balance sheets. It shows up in the price of bread. It reshapes the job prospects of a port worker in Ismailia and the fuel bill of a container ship captain 10,000 miles away. This is not a story about shipping routes. It is a story about how fragile the systems we depend on really are, and how a single corridor of water, barely wider than a football field, can hold the economic fate of millions in its current. The passage is still open. The question is, for how long? If this story changed how you think about global trade, share it with someone who should hear it. Subscribe for more stories about the hidden forces shaping our world. And let us know in the comments, do you think the Suez Canal can survive this crisis?